Since 1970, many cases have challenged the assertions behind the close of Blue Book. But a 1986 sighting near Anchorage, Alaska would produce standout evidence that demands to be taken seriously.
Yeah, that's 1-2 again. On some other equipment over here, we have confirmed there is a flight size of 2 around your 1550 squawk. Where is he following him? It looks like he is, yes.
In this case, a captain with 30 years of flight experience puts his reputation on the line by reporting an enormous craft that follows him for nearly an hour. An encounter that would yield the longest recorded data of a UFO to date. Hard evidence that would be brought all the way to the White House.
They were all excited about it. So I said, what do you think it is? He says, well, it's a UFO.
As Captain Tarucci was approaching Fairbanks, he received permission to carry out a 360-degree turn. He wanted to try to get away from that object that was on his left-hand side. His supposition was that the object would continue in a straight flight, and he would bank to the right and leave it behind.
Yeah, that's 1-2 again. On some other equipment over here, we have confirmed there is a flight size of 2 around your 1550 squawk. Where is he following him? It looks like he is, yes.
As Tarucci continued the 360-degree turn, the object traveled around the circle with him, which is very interesting because it has to be going faster than that airplane to keep up. So the phenomenon had to be under good control, perhaps intelligent control, to maintain precise station with that airplane.
The pilot sees it, his co-pilot sees it. The military base and the Anchorage controller track it on radar. And a United Airlines passenger jet flying nearby also reports unknown traffic in the area. When Callahan returns to Washington, a meeting is arranged with the White House scientific team to review the materials.
There was 3 scientists from Reagan's staff. There was 3 guys that said they were with the CIA, and I played the tape 3 times for them. When the video got done, they were all excited about it. They're drooling. They can't wait to get their hands on all this data. This is the first time they ever had more than a few minutes of radar data to go through. And then the CIA guy, he steps forward and he says, this event, pointing to the TV monitor, never happened. We were never here. We're confiscating all this data, and you're all sworn to secrecy. So I said, what do you think it is? I'm still thinking it's the stealth bomber. He says, well, it's a UFO.
2 months after Callahan's meeting, the FAA releases an official explanation for the sighting, which, like the Phoenix and Chicago cases, seeks to explain away the phenomenon.
They said it was a split beacon. It was a ghost target. It was ring around. It never happened. But the Japanese pilots do not see ghost targets. They don't see ring around. They don't see split beacons. We only see a dot or a slash on radar. You have to rely on the pilot telling you what's there.
In the early hours of the morning of Friday the 26th of February 2016, Pentyrch, a small town located on the outskirts of the Welsh capital, was disturbed by a great commotion. Starting at around 2 a.m, residents took to social media to complain about being startled awake by the sound of several military helicopters circling above the town. Some users reported seeing helicopters land on the local common, with others complaining that military presence over Pentyrch lasted for many hours. Later that morning, as the sun rose, weary-eyed residents turned to the local news for an explanation. The disturbance was, according to the media outlet Wales Online, a major training drill between the British Army and Royal Air Force. Described as a bi-annual training package known as Exercise Chameleon, the events were said to be an entirely normal military exercise, and as such did not require local people to worry. And so there was a simple explanation, or so it seemed. Like so many others in the area that day, Kaz Clark, a resident of Pentyrch, a village located just 6 miles from Llantrisant, had suffered a sleepless night. When she read the Wales Online article, however, she was wide awake. "I can categorically state that this was no exercise," Clark wrote in a comment she posted on the article on the day of the happening. She continued to explain,
in shock and awe of what I was seeing when red light turned into 3, which was a triangle on the oblique angle coming in point first, which turned out to be a full-size pyramid.
This pyramid, Clark claims, was an intelligently controlled craft. Standing at the gate that marked the entrance to the field, she and Dave watched it and witnessed something spectacular.
The leading set of 6 lights on the near side edge were brighter than the rest of the ship, like some kind of steering mechanism for the ship. It came in point first, and when it was fully here, it came down in a pendulum motion and lined up behind those trees there. And when it was in the upright position, it fired this green object out at the top like it had been fired out of a cannon, so fast. It skipped across and in front, or just above, these trees on my left-hand side here, and just rocked backwards and forwards gently. I can't tell you what shape it was because it was too bright, brighter than the moonlight, like a really bright green star, about the size of a small car. The E3 Sentry was flying up by this time and back round and coming back down again. I was standing on the gate, I had my leg actually hooked over the top, and I was staring through the bare trees to get a better look, because this pyramid listed to the right-hand side, still turning very slowly anti-clockwise, started to move backwards away from us. And I said to Dave, it's landing. But in actual fact, the field rises there, because you've been out and seen it, and the land was coming up to meet it. And as it neared the ground, it ejected this hand, I described it like a hand of lightning. But it wasn't thin lightning, like we see here. It was thick, like fire, like fingers. And the whole thing lit up really brightly, so you could see the whole outline of it. And such was the size of it, while I was staring at the bottom, you couldn't see the top. That's how big. Now, whilst I was fixated, and don't ask me why I was fixated on it touching the ground, because I don't know to this day, but David said he saw 15 or 20, he described them as orbs, come out the top of it. And I can stand here and tell you that I saw them, but I genuinely didn't, because I was so fixated on it touching the ground. Anyway, I heard, it went from like tail light red to like bright white orange, and the nearest lights to the ground were the brightest.
At this point, with the pyramid object and green light in front of her, as well as the E3 Sentry still flying overhead, Clark describes the arrival of yet more military aircraft.
Wingtip to wingtip, 2 big American planes with 2 engines, propeller engines, on each wing. And I looked up just to see them go over the top. And when I looked back, I couldn't see the pyramid anymore. But that's not to say it wasn't there, I just couldn't see it. But the green object was still there.
With 3 planes now in the sky, yet more appeared. Clark describes these as 2 C-130s, big Hercules aircraft, which turned and flew in behind the other planes. That placed 2 planes out wide and 2 planes in close.
And this green object shot across really fast in front of the planes. The E3 Sentry is still going up and back round again. Excuse me. And it flashed 3 really bright strobes at the aircraft, and then seemed to get excited somehow, like bobbing and skipping and bobbing and skipping in the westward direction towards Llantrisant, because our planes were following it. I think it was a deliberate decoy to draw the aircraft away from the main ship.
With the green object skipping away into the distance towards the town of Llantrisant, Clark watched the 4 military aircraft follow in pursuit. The events of the night, however, were far from over.
And these 2 red barrel-shaped objects came from my left-hand side. One stopped above the hedge just where I was standing. And I'm still standing on the gate. And I just stared at it for a few seconds because of the shock and because I wanted to know. And I could see all the insides moving, like I described it like white noise on a TV screen, but it was more 3D than that. It was more like it was turning in on itself, not flat, you know. And then I looked to see where the second one was, and that hadn't stopped. And that was right above me, just above this branch here. And the one above me changed colour from tail light red to traffic light green, and I could see even clearer the insides moving. And I felt it scan me. When this one had scanned me above here, the red one that had remained sentry the whole time was still there. The green barrel then moved off to my right-hand side above these rooftops here. And then the red barrel moved off to my left-hand side and down across the field. And I was stood on the gate and I watched it until I couldn't see it anymore.
After the barrel objects disappeared from view, Clark and Dave decided to walk into the field to the second gate. They hoped to be able to see some of the other barrel-like objects, which Dave had observed come from the pyramid craft. As they walked, the E-3 Sentry plane followed them overhead. It was too dark and slippy to see anything more.
So we'd walked back to this gate and we heard the Apache helicopters coming. We'd gone around the side there just so you could get a better viewpoint through the trees. And there were 3 Apache helicopters, one above 2, going low across the fields, pushing all the trees and hedges flat with the force of their rotor blades. Big red pulsing lights going out in front of them on an interception course with the green object that had gone west before. In my opinion, we were only standing at this gate, including the time that it took us to walk down and back again, for maybe 10 minutes. I got back to my house. I heard an enormous explosion from the direction of Pentyrch. Pentyrch's 5 miles from here, and it was enormous. Kaboom. You know, this is not a little fake incendiary device. This was an explosion.
And certainly, as is evidenced from police transcripts from that morning, Clark was by no means the only person in the area to have heard the explosion. People were shaken awake. Car alarms were set off. Seismological data from the British Geological Survey also confirms that, in the early hours of the morning on Friday the 26th of February 2016, there was a seismological anomaly in South Wales. Despite the closest station to Pentyrch being located some 45 miles away, the event still registered. Described by the British Geological Survey as a small transient signal, it was registered at around 4:20 AM. Around this time, there were also said to have been reports of an explosion being heard close to the Royal Glamorgan Hospital in Pentyrch, with it being claimed that the blast shook the hospital to the foundations, caused the windows to rattle, and resulted in thick smoke coming inside. The official explanation for the military helicopters witnessed by members of the public over Pentyrch was the training exercise Chameleon. However, when asked via a Freedom of Information request whether or not the reported explosion was related to this exercise, the Ministry of Defence said that it would not be possible for the MOD to retrospectively confirm that the shaking reported in February 2016 was caused by the simulated explosions. The wording of this response leaves a lot to be desired. What makes it particularly interesting, however, is that a response was given, whereas other questions posed via Freedom of Information request related to the Pentyrch incident have been met with blanket Section 26 exemptions, which allow for the withholding of information that might be considered a security risk. Why was this question answered? And more importantly, why did the MOD not simply confirm that the shaking was a result of their simulated explosions? As such,
Deixa un poquinho que esté.
je pas aqui. Vai que ruim.
Something irrefutable, a piece of evidence that would bring this fully into the realm of science.
On a spring evening in a village not far from where it all began, this evidence would finally arrive, and the results would be more than they had imagined.
My feeling at the time, I must admit, it was a fake.
More than a year after the Belgian Wave began, UFO reports continue to flood the office of SOBEP's co-founder, Pentyrch UFO.
For almost 18 months, we collected massive observations, and we met several hundred people. We collected something like 60 photographs of unidentified flying things, and almost the same amount of video film. But unfortunately, they're all very bad. But we were lucky to find one good picture. And this picture was taken in the small village of Pentyrch, which is not that far from Eupen.
The 4th of April 1990. At 10 o'clock in the evening, the girl was walking her dog in the garden, and she saw a very strange object. She came back in and told her boyfriend, "We have something strange here, can you come and have a look?" And he went out and he took his camera. He only had 2 pictures left, so he leaned against the wall, didn't move at all, and set an exposure time of about 1 to 2 seconds.
He took 2 pictures, and when he got his film developed, he saw that one of the 2 pictures was blank. There was nothing on it, so he threw it away. But the second one was interesting. He saw 3 lights and something reddish right in the middle, but that was all. I received the original at the time. I looked at it and said, oh my God, that's too much. My feeling at the time, I must admit, it was a fake. So I built a small model, and I tried to reproduce what was on the slides. And I immediately understood that it was not a model. So we decided to see someone who was an expert in digital analysis, someone who had the right tools to detect and to prove it was a fake or not.
The slide is put under an intensive year-long study by Professor Mark Ashewa, a nuclear physicist at the Royal Military Academy in Brussels.
Professor Ashewa's analysis of the blue component of the slide showed that one side of the triangular object is perfectly in focus, but 2 other sides are blurred. This proves that there is an independent movement of the object. It was not a fake.
The slide is further analyzed by scientists around the world, including Professor André Marion, a nuclear physicist at the University of Paris-Sud.
Professor Marion discovered that there was a magnetic field around that object, because he observed a pattern like iron filings behave in a magnetic field.
Professor Marion's findings trigger speculation that the craft may have moved using a magnetoplasma dynamic propulsion system, an electrically powered engine that uses a magnetic field to generate thrust. Such a system could also account for the lack of wind and noise reported by witnesses.
In the history of UFO study, the Pentyrch photograph stands out as one of the most convincing pieces of evidence of a sighting to date.
Like a frisbee? Like a UFO type thing.
Now, new evidence, audio recordings, radar data, and never-before-heard witness testimony make these sightings part of the select 5% that is impossible to ignore.
It's time to correct the record once and for all.
The large majority of UFO reports are made by civilians in isolated cases with one or two corroborating witnesses and can be easily dismissed.
Okay, here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. That's unreal.
But when a sighting occurs over a nuclear-armed American military base at the height of the Cold War and is seen by 60 Air Force personnel for 45 minutes, it demands closer scrutiny.
Here we have a senior officer making a report of a UFO directly over the most important base in the whole NATO network, and there's no response to him.
The team and witnesses were told to treat the investigation as top secret, and no further discussion would be allowed.
This is the extraordinary incident at Rendlesham Forest.
My name is Colonel Charles Halt. In 1980, I was a deputy base commander at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge, England. At that time, Bentwaters was the largest tactical fighter wing in the free world, and our mission as a key NATO installation was to be prepared should anything happen. Early in the morning of the 26th of December, I went in to collect the police blotters. That's the chronological list of what happened the previous 24 hours. And as I walked into the office, the on-duty desk sergeant started to laugh. He said, "Colonel, you're not going to believe this. Last night, 3 of our policemen were out in the forest chasing UFOs. They called in and thought they saw a downed aircraft. They went out and investigated, and they had some type of an experience." I said, "We'll put something into the blotter to the effect that they saw some lights, and we'll leave it at that for now."
Halt plans for the UFO story to go away, despite growing rumors around the base about a strange craft seen in the woods on Christmas night. But within days, he is forced to act.
2 nights later, we were having the Christmas party, and we were just finishing the main course and getting ready for dessert when the on-duty flight lieutenant cornered the base commander and I and said, "We have to talk. The UFO is back." I was sure I could put this thing to rest. So I took my little pocket recorder, which I carried everywhere, an APN 27, which is a Geiger counter, and we went out into the forest.
Late in the evening on December 27, 1980, Colonel Halt takes a team of 4 officers, including a flight commander and a disaster preparedness expert, out to the site where the alleged craft had landed 2 nights earlier.
Lo and behold, I find half our security force out there. 5, 6, 7 vehicles, Jeeps, 6-passenger pickup trucks, and they're trying to light up the forest. Here I'm thinking, this is a public relations disaster just waiting to happen. So I tell them to knock it off, get as many people and things back to the base as they can. And with a little tape recorder, I took a small team into the forest to the alleged landing site.
We found a small blast, what looks like a scrubbed up area here. We got very positive readings. See, is that here the center? Yes, it is.
Halt and his team locate 3 indentations in the shape of a triangle at the alleged landing site.
What kind of readings we get? Anything? Let's go say 7 tenths there. 7 tenths right here in the center?
The radiation readings are 10 times the normal or background level, signaling that there is definitely more to the sighting than Halt had first allowed.
We found rub marks on the trees facing the site and quite a few broken branches on the ground. And when we looked up, we noticed a break in the tree canopy above us. It was obvious something had come up through or down through the trees. As we're investigating, we also hear the barnyard animals, the cows and the chickens, sort of went into a frenzy for a short period of time and then got very silent. And then somebody suddenly notices a glowing red object on the far side of the forest. And I immediately turned my tape recorder back on.
Where? Right at this position here, straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flash right there. There it is. Hey, I see it too. What is it? We don't know, sir. Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. Maybe a quarter to half mile, maybe further out. Let's move out to the edge of the clearing so I can get a better look at it.
As Halt and his team race to get closer, the details of the object come into focus.
was oval. This was all reddish orange. And there were like pieces of molten metal dripping off it, and they were falling to the ground. It had a black-like center. This was solid black. And this would actually like blink, almost like an eye. It moved horizontally through the trees, about 4 to 6 feet off the ground, zigzagging, bobbing up and down a little bit, as though they were searching for something, and it definitely was under some type of intelligent control.
Holt's description matches many other sightings of UFOs. Witnesses often report red orbs that dart and search as if under intelligent control. But for Holt and the other officers, their experience is about to become anything but typical.
It appears that you may be moving a little bit this way. It's probably not past that. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way. There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
We watched it for probably 2 or 3 minutes, and suddenly it silently exploded into 5 white objects, and everything disappeared. Well, this really puts us all but in shock. I'm thinking, I'm never going to be able to explain this. People will never believe this. This is just too bizarre. Well, somebody in the party looks to the north and said, look, what's that? And we see 4 or 5 objects that are elliptical with multicolored lights, probably 3,000 or 4,000 feet in elevation, and they're moving at high speed with sharp angular movements. We hear a lot of chatter on the radios, and we were having difficulties the whole time, too. There was a lot of interference. Some say that sending down a beam into the weapons storage area, and we were all extremely nervous about what was happening.
Moving up fast. There's one on the right heading away, too. Yeah, both heading north. Oh, here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now.
Suddenly, one comes overhead and stops. It sends down a beam at our feet. When the beam came down, we stood perfectly still. I don't think anybody moved. Everybody just stood there in shock. And it's going through my mind, there has to be some type of a reason for this. Is this a communication? Is this a weapon? Is this a warning? What do we do now?
Holt and his men are transfixed by the craft looming overhead. The sight is something unfamiliar to these trained military professionals.
Never seen anything like it. And while we're standing there, just as suddenly as it appeared, click, it's gone. I'm thinking, there is no real explanation for all of this. Why did I get involved? This is not exactly career enhancing.
Over 60 Air Force personnel are reported to have seen a UFO during the 2 nights that comprised the Rendlesham incident.